And I guess we'll turn on the mic. My name is Annette Lovell. I'm your worship associate this morning. We are bringing your service today with Reverend Kevin Carson, and Drew White is our media tech. Vic is out today. I would like everyone to notice the words on the back of your order of service. Our UUCIF mission statement is the best welcome that I thought I could share today, and I want to read it out loud to remind us why we are here. Is honor the individual's right to religious and spiritual freedom. Minister to each other and the community at large. Nurture the search for truth and meaning. Be a loving and intergenerational community welcoming to all beliefs, races, sexual orientation, ethnicities, and gender identities. Improve the quality of life by living our values and working for local and universal justice. That's why we're here. And it's nice to share those words once in a while to remind us. So like always, we're going to start our service with a few announcements, get the business taken care of. First of all, if you're joining us online today, please sign into the chat box. We'd love to see who's with us. And if you want to share a joy or concern, please put it in the chat box so we can grab it. For those of us here in the sanctuary, joys and concern papers are back with our greeter, with Pam. You can fill those out and give them to her, and we will collect them later in the service. We have had two longtime, beautiful members of our church recently pass away. And though neither have been active the past few years due to some health reasons, we are going to be honoring them, and we want everyone to be aware. There is a celebration of life for Ruth Barnes Kuntz that will be held this Friday here at the church. We are surrounded by her art in this building. It will be Friday at 1 o'clock. And also a celebration of life for Bonnie Anderson will be held the following week, the 27th, from 2 to 6 at her home. So please check the phone directory or the emails to get that address. The next thing is a reminder. So next week is General Assembly. They will be streaming from, is it Pittsburgh? Yes. They'll be streaming from Pittsburgh, so it's going to change up our service quite a bit. First of all, services are going to start at 9 o'clock, not 10:30. 9 o'clock. If you want to come here to the sanctuary, everything's going to be streamed. But at least you can be a part of it. We can be together as you're watching GA. If that does not suit you, we are hoping to be able to get it to restream through our YouTube channel. So just stay tuned from that. I'm sure it'll go out in one of our email updates. Another announcement is just this morning, the lights in this bathroom right outside the sanctuary, it's not working. It's probably just a breaker, but there is a restroom further down the hall. It's too dark to use this one, so just an announcement. Let's see, July. We are taking July off. We tried this a couple of years ago. We've really enjoyed it. As worship associates, we get really busy. We get very small crowds in the summer, so we are taking July off. We will resume the first part of August. I think it's August 6th is the date. So stay tuned. There are a lot of wonderful things online that you can watch. But we hope everybody will be back the 1st of August. So one more service and a break. So let us now prepare for worship with a few moments to just settle in, calm our breathing, to be present today together. Let us breathe deeply together and listen to one another, and I will ring the peace bowl 3 times. So like our mission statement, our covenant helps put into words the feels and the ideas of how we want to live our daily lives. It is a reminder of our agreement, of how we are to treat each other and ourselves. So would you please recite with me our congregation's covenant? It is in your order of service, and then we will light our chalice. So, love is the spirit of this community, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And our chalice lighting comes to us today from Annie Forrester. She says, "Come we now out of the darkness of our unknowing and the dusk of our dreaming. Come we now from far places. Come we now into the twilight of our awakening and the reflection of our gathering. Come we now all together. We bring unilluminated our dark caves of doubting. We seek unbedazzled the clear light of understanding. May the spark of our joining kindle our resolve, brighten our spirits, reflect our love, and unshadow our days. Come we now enter the dawning."
Good morning. Our call to worship this morning is from the Reverend Theodore Parker. Be ours a religion which, like sunshine, goes everywhere. Its temple all space, its shrine the good heart, its creed all truth, its ritual works of love, its profession of faith divine living. I invite you now to rise in body or spirit and join in singing our opening hymn, number 123, Spirit of Life.
You got the mic right 2 times. Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me. Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Good morning. This morning's Time for All Ages is from a book titled Mr. Temkin Climbs a Tree, written by Carrie Fagan and illustrated by Carls Arvad. I'm sitting on the porch, counting my baseball cards, when Mr. Temkin walks by on his way home from synagogue. He lives alone in the house next to ours. As usual, he waves to me. "Hi, Marky," says Mr. Temkin. "Ready to help?" "Ready," I say. "Mr. Temkin, how old are you?" I ask as I come down the porch steps. "Not as old as Rip Van Winkle," chuckles Mr. Temkin, "but I'm getting close." My job is to water all the flowers in Mr. Temkin's garden. Mr. Temkin fills the bird feeder. The birds twitter impatiently, and as soon as Mr. Temkin's done, they swoop down and start eating. "Hey, look, Marky, a cedar waxwing," Mr. Temkin says, pointing. I stare at the beautiful bird. I've never noticed a bird like this before. And so Daz says that spending time with Mr. Temkin is a mitzvah. And if it is, it's a fun one, because I really like Mr. Temkin. Mr. Temkin suggests I pull up weeds. "Is it hard to be old?" I ask as I work. "Sometimes," Mr. Temkin says with a nod. "But there are 4 things that keep me going." "What things?" The first is walking to synagogue every morning. The second is smelling my roses. The third is listening to the birds. And the fourth is you. Me? "There's nothing like having a friend," Mr. Temkin says. "You're good company, Marky." The next morning, Mr. Temkin comes out onto the porch and waves as usual. I jump up and go over to help him. Mr. Temkin is in a huff. "Those pesky squirrels keep raiding my bird feeder. I'm going to have to hang it higher up where they can't reach it." Mr. Temkin ties a rope to the bird feeder and starts climbing. "Mr. Temkin, aren't you too old to climb a tree?" I ask. "Nonsense." Nonsense. Mr. Temkin climbs higher and higher. "I think this is far enough," he says. "I'm getting a little dizzy up here." "Maybe you should come down," I suggest. "I just have to tie this rope to the end of the branch." And as Mr. Temkin reaches out and ties the rope to the branch, suddenly he loses his balance. Mr. Temkin falls through the branches and leaves, and he lands on the ground with a whomp. I run over. "Are you okay, Mr. Temkin?" "I'm fine, Marky, except for my ankle. I don't think I can stand up." "Don't move, Mr. Temkin," I say. "I'll be right back." I run into my house. "Mr. Temkin fell out of his tree," I tell Mom. She calls 911 from her cell phone as she hurries outside. The paramedics carry Mr. Temkin to the ambulance on a stretcher. "So much fuss for nothing," Mr. Temkin sighs. I watch the ambulance go down the street. All day, I wait for Mr. Temkin to come back. I eat my lunch on the porch. I read books. I watch the birds. Finally, a taxi pulls up in front of Mr. Temkin's house. The driver takes a wheelchair out of the trunk. He helps Mr. Temkin get out of the car and into the wheelchair. There's a brand new bandage on Mr. Temkin's foot. "Oh, don't worry, Marky. It's just a sprain," he says. "I need to keep this bandage on for 2 weeks so it will heal properly." I breathe a sigh of relief. I am glad nothing was broken. Me too. Climbing trees is not for old men, and I guess I'm just a foolish old man, he says. "No, you're not," I blurt out. "When I'm old, I'm going to climb trees too." Mr. Temkin laughs. "What time is it?" Mr. Temkin asks, looking at his watch. "I think I can make it to synagogue for the afternoon service. See you later, Marky." As I watch, Mr. Temkin pushes himself along the sidewalk in his wheelchair. But he only goes a few feet before he slows to a stop. "I guess I'm just not strong enough," he says. "Maybe I can push you," I offer. Mr. Temkin's eyebrows go up. "Better ask your parents." My mom says that helping Mr. Temkin would make me a mensch. I get behind the wheelchair and grab the handles. Mr. Temkin grasps the big wheel. Together, we move along the sidewalk. "Teamwork!" cries Mr. Temkin. At last we get to the synagogue. "Isaac Temkin," says the rabbi as we enter. "What happened to you? And hello, Marky, nice to see you." "I fell out of a tree," said Mr. Temkin. "Isn't it nice that my friend Marky helped me get to synagogue today?" The rabbi smiles. He gives me a kippah to put on my head, and the service begins. Mr. Temkin and I wheel home again. "You must be tired," says Mr. Temkin, pushing me all that way. "I'm fine," I say. "Now I'm going to take care of the garden." Mr. Temkin sits in his wheelchair as I work. "Let's give a little more water to those roses," he says. "The bird feeder is too high for me to reach." "No climbing," Mr. Temkin says. "This time we'll use our heads." We find a small bucket and tie it to the end of a broomstick. Mr. Temkin fills the bucket with bird seed, holds it up, and pours the seed into the feeder. The birds immediately fly down. "Look, blue jays," says Mr. Temkin. We both grin. Every morning, I help push Mr. Temkin to the synagogue and back again. 2 weeks later, Mr. Temkin goes to the hospital for a checkup. I sit on the porch, waiting for him to come back. A taxi brings Mr. Temkin home. He gets out without his bandage. He does a little dance. "Hooray!" I shout. Summer is over, and Mom and Dad watch from the porch as I head off to school. Mr. Temkin comes outside. "Now it's my turn to wait for you," he says with a wink. As I climb onto my school bus, I can hear the birds singing. Mr. Temkin is right. There is nothing like having a friend. We will now sing out the children.
As we leave this friendly place, love give light to which we learn, light our hearts till we return.
You want to come this way? Yeah. So it's times for our joys and concerns. First of all, Drew, are there anything in the chat box? Okay. Well, we have a mixed joy and a concern from Amanda Logan. She says, after 3.5 years with CEI and a total of roughly 16 years in the public and nonprofit sectors, I'll be starting my first private sector job in a week as a director of public affairs for Ball Ventures. Congratulations. And Ball Ventures is a good company. That should be that's excellent. Yeah. And then we have a lot of new people. So we have newcomers Kelsey Riker, and I hope I pronounce it Kaysen. We also have Mason with us and Aaliyah. So welcome everyone. Are there any others that I haven't grabbed? Okay, we will light one more candle for those joys and concerns that we choose not to share at this time.
So our reading this morning is an excerpt from an 1851 address to the Boston clergy about the Fugitive Slave Act by Reverend Theodore Parker. And a couple of notes on this before I start is you'll hear references to the escaped slave Thomas Sims, who was living in Boston and was arrested that year. Sims was forced by a federal judge to be returned to slavery, and he had to be escorted by the U.S. Marines to a ship because of the uproar his case caused in Boston. In 1863, Sims escaped again and returned to Boston. And you'll also hear an unusual word, barracoon, which is a Spanish word for the temporary cells where slaves were kept before being transported to auction. Who is it that opposes the fugitive slave law? Men that have always been on the side of law and order and who do not violate the statutes of men for their own advantage. The disobedience of the fugitive slave law is one of the strongest guarantees for the obedience of any just law. You cannot trust a people who will keep law because it's law, nor need we distrust people that will only keep a law when it is just. The fugitive slave law, if obeyed, will do more to overturn the power of human law than all disobedience to it, the most complete. Then as to the dissolution of the Union, suppose that was the alternative, that we must have the fugitive slave law or dissolution. Where were the worst, which comes nearest to the law of God which we all are to keep? For my own part, I would rather see my house burnt to the ground and my family thrown one by one amid the blazing rafters of my own roof, and I myself thrown in last of all, rather than have a single fugitive slave sent back as Thomas Sims was sent back. Nay, I should rather see this union dissolved, till there was not a territory so large as the county of Suffolk. Let us lose everything but fidelity to God. A little while ago, we were told we must not preach on this matter of slavery because it was an abstraction. Then because the North was all right on that subject, and then because we had nothing to do with it. We must go to Charleston or to New Orleans to see it. But now it is a concrete thing. We see what public opinion is on the matter of slavery, what it is in Boston, nay, what it is with members of this conference. It favors slavery and this wicked law. We need not go to Charleston and New Orleans to see slavery. Our own courthouse was a barracoon. Our officers of this city were slave hunters, and members of the Unitarian churches in Boston are kidnappers. I have in my church black men, fugitive slaves. They are the crown of my apostleship, the seal of my ministry. It becomes me to look after their bodies in order to save their souls. This law has brought us into the most intimate connection with the sin of slavery. I have been obliged to take my own parishioners into my house to keep them out of the clutches of the kidnapper. Yes, gentlemen, I have been obliged to do that, and then to keep my doors guarded by day as well as by night. Yes, I have had to arm myself. I have written my sermons with a pistol at my desk, loaded with a cap on the nipple and ready for action. Yea, with a drawn sword within reach of my right hand. This I have done in Boston, in the middle of the 19th century, have been obliged to do it to defend the innocent members of my own church, women as well as men. An offering to support the mission of this church will now be given and gratefully received. Since today is Father's Day, the day we set aside to honor and remember our fathers and reflect on the idea of fatherhood, I thought it would be a good time to talk about the lives of two of the men who could justifiably be called fathers of Unitarian Universalism. There were certainly many other notable fathers and mothers of Unitarian Universalism we could name, but I chose these two men because they represent the two ancestral roots of our denomination, as well as two important eras in the evolution of our faith. And I feel today is an especially good time to talk about our history, since next week our denomination will be holding its annual General Assembly, this year in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This is the meeting where the representatives of our congregations gather either in person or virtually to elect officers and conduct the business of the Unitarian Universalist Association. It is a time for members of our faith to come together and confront the outstanding issues of the day, as we have always done. A time for our movement to examine how well our practices align with our principles. And sometimes this means a slight change of course as we evolve once again to remain relevant and a needed voice for liberal religion in the world. We are constantly reinventing ourselves, so in a sense, all of us are fathers and mothers of Unitarian Universalism. Ours is a faith that honors tradition, but is not constrained by dogma or creeds or even our own theological past. And the two men I will speak about were definitely among those who pushed the theological boundaries of our faith. For those not as familiar with the history of our Unitarian Universalist faith, let me start by providing a little historical context. The Unitarian Universalist Association was formed in 1961 by the merger of two historically liberal Christian denominations, the Universalist Church of America, which was founded in 1793, and the American Unitarian Association, which was founded in 1825. Prior to 1961, you were either a Unitarian or a Universalist. Originally, the theological heart of Universalism was centered on the universal salvation of all souls, and Unitarianism was known for its rationalism, its emphasis on applying reason in matters of religion. Over time, both religions evolved. As they evolved, they became very similar in their theological diversity. However, the primary motivation for the 1961 merger was the desire of two small denominations to remain viable in the changing American religious landscape, more than any shared theology or doctrines. It is a rich and fascinating story, and today I want to talk about two men, one Universalist and one Unitarian, who heavily influenced the story of our faith. The first father I present is the Reverend John Murray, who is often called the father of Universalism in America. Murray lived from 1741 until 1815. As a young man in England, he displayed a keen intellect, a talent for public speaking, and a religious calling that led him first out of traditional Anglicanism into Methodism, and later into Universalism. In London, he joined the liberal congregation of the famous minister, the Reverend George Whitefield, who would play such a central role in the era known as the First Great Awakening in America in the 1700s. But as he trained for the ministry, Murray became familiar with the teachings of James Relly and became a convinced Universalist. When Whitefield's congregation found out, he was summoned before an inquisitional committee and dismissed. And tragically, not long afterward, his wife and infant son became ill, and both perished. Out of work and unable to pay for the medical care they had received, Murray was arrested and thrown into debtor's prison. He had certainly reached the darkest hour of his life as a young father and minister. Once released from prison, Murray turned away from ministry and decided to leave England for a new start in America. His story then takes on an amazing, almost biblical character. He left England on the sailing brig hand in hand, bound for New York. When they encountered some storms, the ship was diverted first to Philadelphia. Then, working their way back to New York along the New Jersey coast, they ran aground on a sandbar near Barnegat Bay. While the ship was stuck, the captain sent Murray ashore in charge of a small crew to purchase supplies as they waited for the wind and tides to cooperate. Once ashore, Murray was directed to the home of a local farmer named Thomas Potter. Potter lived in the area of Good Luck Point, New Jersey, on Barnegat Bay. Though he was illiterate, he was said to be very intelligent and inquisitive. And as the story goes, after hearing the Bible read to him, Potter became a convinced Universalist. Historians believe it is probable that he was also influenced by the Universalist Baptists and Quakers who lived around him. He was an extremely pious man and determined to spread the gospel of universal salvation. So he built a meeting house on his own land and trusted that God would send him a preacher. In his memoirs, Murray recalled that as the two met, Potter said to his astonishment, "I have longed to see you. I have been expecting you a long time." After Potter confirmed that Murray was indeed a minister with Universalist beliefs, he was convinced that this was the preacher sent by God in answer to his prayers. Who could blame him? Potter invited Murray to preach the next Sunday in the meeting house on his farm. Murray protested that he was no longer a preacher, but Potter would not be deterred. Potter reportedly told him, "The wind will never change, sir, until you have delivered to us in that meeting house a message from God." Reluctantly, Murray agreed that he would preach the following Sunday if the ship was still stuck. On Sunday, September 30th, 1770, the ship was still stuck, and Murray preached a sermon on Universalism in Thomas Potter's meeting house. It is said that as soon as he finished the sermon, the wind rose and the brig, hand in hand, was free to depart. Murray departed, but soon returned to live in the area for some time, and he and Potter became close friends. Freshly inspired, Murray began to preach Universalism in local towns and villages throughout the Northeast, and he married his second wife, the author and early feminist Judith Sargent. If you were here for my Mother's Day sermon, I talked about Judith Sargent Murray as one of the mothers of Unitarian Universalism in her own right. It was truly a remarkable marriage of two profound thinkers and activists, one of the true power couples of 18th century America. Settling in Gloucester, Massachusetts, John Murray established the first Universalist church in America there in 1774. And he was instrumental in organizing the Universalist Church of America as a new denomination in their 1793 General Assembly. It was in Gloucester that he met Judith Sargent. The miraculous, or at least uncanny, circumstances of Murray's story are remarkable, and they demonstrate the love, despair, redemption, and resolve of this father of our movement. As Universalism gained traction in the early 19th century, they encountered hostility on a number of fronts. Some of the most vocal early critics were those Congregationalist heretics who had begun to split off from their more conservative siblings and had begun to be called Unitarians. The truth is, Unitarians and Universalists didn't always get along. In fact, the famous Unitarian minister William Ellery Channing called Universalism, quote, an irrational doctrine, and even added, quote, the growth of Universalism is the most threatening moral evil in our part of the country. Unitarians were more head than heart at the time in their quest to apply reason to religion, and Universalists were immersed in a sense of God's profound unconditional love for humanity. Clearly, the idea of merger was a long way off. But if Unitarians were opening the door to a more liberal, rational form of Christianity, our second father, the Reverend Theodore Parker, blew the door right off its hinges. Parker was born in 1810 and lived until 1860, when, like many of his family before him, he died of tuberculosis. His grave is in Florence, Italy, where he died. Parker was a brilliant intellect who studied both the latest biblical criticism coming from Europe and the works of transcendentalists such as Emerson. In sermons such as his famous The Transient and the Permanent in Christianity, he pushed the envelope of liberal Christianity to the point that many critics regarded him as non-Christian. Though he retained a general belief in God, he rejected traditional concepts such as the divinity of Jesus, the reality of miracles, and the authority of the Bible. He believed that if any religion could be called true, then its intrinsic truths must transcend the boundaries of its own scriptures and prophets with a universal message for humanity. Even by today's standards, he would be firmly on the cutting edge of liberal religion. And Unitarianism would never be the same. If his theological work was the end of the story, he would rank among the most influential theologians in the history of our tradition. But Parker was also a major force in the social justice movements of his day. When you consider that his congregation in Boston included such notables as Louisa May Alcott, William Lloyd Garrison, Julia Ward Howe, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, it is not surprising that Parker was a champion for abolition, temperance, and prison reform, and his enthusiasm galvanized other reformers. It is for his stance on abolition that Parker is most remembered. As you heard in the reading this morning, He often harbored fugitive slaves in his own home despite real personal risks. And historians have revealed that in the years just before the Civil War, Parker secretly supported John Brown and sent money to anti-slavery groups in Kansas. He came to believe that a peaceful end to slavery was no longer possible. Parker and another Unitarian minister, Thomas Wentworth Higginson, were part of the group known as the Secret Six, who financed John Brown's ill-fated raid on the Harper's Ferry Arsenal. So given the historically progressive leanings of most Unitarian Universalists, it would be nice to imagine that the Boston Unitarian establishment recognized the prophetic vision of Theodore Parker and hailed him as a hero. But unfortunately, the opposite is true. He was seen as too radical and too heretical, and many of his fellow clergymen ostracized him publicly. Unable to defrock him because of the independence of our congregations, they did everything they could to alienate him from pulpits and ministerial associations. But Parker continued his ministry until his death, often drawing enormous crowds to venues around Boston. At one point, his congregation grew to about 2,000 people, roughly 3% of Boston's entire population at the time. It is tragic that he did not live to see the end of slavery, and I imagine Parker would be dismayed by the slow progress on civil rights in America and the deaths of young black men that precipitated the Black Lives Matter movement. But I feel he would be proud of how much our Unitarian Universalist faith has embraced our calling to do the work of justice, to stand on the side of love. Both Murray and Parker were fathers in the traditional sense, with families of their own, and who could fault them if they had chosen a more peaceful, ordinary life? Instead, they challenged orthodoxy and overcame the obstacles of failed ministries, personal tragedies, and sometimes public humiliation, and persevered to bring their guidance and love to our religious movement in its youth. Fathers must often rise to the occasion and take on different roles, whether it is nurturer, teacher, breadwinner, stalwart defender, or disciplinarian. And all of us have moments of failure and disappointment. This is certainly true of the fathers of our faith. And like most fathers, the will and stamina to stay in their public work was often rooted in the support they received from their families at home. As we continue our journey into this new century of Unitarian Universalism in America, it is my hope that new fathers and mothers will emerge to provide the guidance, nurture, and resolve we need. With their help, I believe we can bring our unique message of hope to the vast number of Americans who wander in the spiritual desert and yearn for something more. If history holds true, it will probably be the rabble-rousers of our denomination who will ultimately guide us on the right path. So it is also my hope that we will recognize these new prophetic voices more readily and empower them to move us boldly forward, and not, like rebellious children, condemn them for their efforts. On this Father's Day, let us give thanks for all the fathers and father figures in our lives, and for the heroic fathers of our liberal faith. Happy Father's Day to you all. I invite you now to join in singing our closing hymn, number 108, My Life Flows On in Endless Song.
My life flows on in endless song above earth's lament hymn that hails a new creation. Through all the tumult and the strife, I hear the music ringing. It sounds an echo in my soul. How can I keep from singing? What though the tempest round me roars? I know the truth, it liveth. What though the darkness round me close? Songs in the night it giveth. No storm can shake my inmost calm, while to that rock I'm clinging. Since love prevails in heaven and earth, how can I keep from singing? When tyrants tremble as they hear the bells of freedom ringing, when friends rejoice both far and near, how can I keep from singing? To prison cell and dungeon vile, our thoughts to them are winging. When friends by shame are undefiled, how can I keep from singing?
Our closing words are attributed to the Reverend John Murray. However, in recent years, there's some question about whether he actually said them. If he didn't say them, he should have. And they certainly reflect the spirit of his theology. Go out into the highways and byways of America, your new country. Give the people blanketed with a decaying and crumbling Calvinism something of your new vision. You may possess only a small light, but uncover it. Let it shine. Use it in order to bring more light and understanding to the hearts and minds of men and women. Give them not hell, but hope and courage. Do not push them deeper into their theological despair, but preach the kindness and everlasting love of God. On a personal note, this is my last Sunday in the pulpit until after our summer break. So I will see you again in August. I hope you will all have a happy and wonderful summer. And remember, once again, that next Sunday's live stream service will be at 9 o'clock here if you want to see the service from General Assembly. And it should be extremely good. It'll probably be a little longer than a typical service. I think they run generally about an hour and a half. But there's lots of good music, good preaching, and you get to see about 2,000 of your co-religionists in a mega church-like setting with jumbo screens and everything. So it's a unique experience that you can only experience at GA or via the live stream. So have a wonderful summer.
And with that, we will extinguish our chalice with the following words, which are in your order of service. So read with me now. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Be safe and be well, and we will see you in August.